So this next bottle, it's a little baby bottle
Hey,
from
but that branding is
Westland.
clear. I know where that's from.
Yep, it's from Westland, and we'll talk about why it's a little baby bottle here in a minute, I'm sure. But this is their Solum American Single Malt. It's their first edition, but this is again sort of part of a trio of releases that they've done, and kind of going back to what you were saying earlier about storytelling,
Hmm.
about like the different like I guess approaches to American single malts. This is really trying to tell the story of the place.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on Westland, or I guess like there's a slightly more mature history of
Yes.
American single malts in the Pacific Northwest, partially because of their ability to grow some of this malt. So, like,
Right.
what are your
Right.
thoughts about, I guess, maybe Westland in general, or in particular, and then I guess PNW whiskey in general?
Yeah, so right, so McCarthy's was one of the first to like kind of get this started and say, well, why are we not making it? We've got barley, it grows well here, and we should be making this. And so it definitely has expanded there through St. George. It's gone, and then Westland, Westward, all of these places are creating, and even within those categories, very different styles of American single malt. And I think what's been wonderful, I also am biased, letting you guys know. And if you see my shirt,
There it is.
yeah, a little biased. So Westland was one of those places. Matt Hoffman is someone I've watched for a very long time and had a little bit of like just like I want to learn from this person. They're doing things that I think are important for the entirety of the industry. And so reached out and I was invited in. So I got to really hang out with the team for 2 weeks and work at the distillery and do everything I could possibly think of. I went up to the maturation, the warehouses, and then also went out to the bread lab, which is where Westland is thinking outside of just what does Westland do for a sense of place, but actually looking at how are we making the industry a better place? How are we ensuring that our entire community and all of our farmers are able to have a healthy wage, are able to grow things that actually have a biodiversity? So one of the things that happens and actually I'm doing a seminar at Tales about farmers and distillers and how we work together. But one of the reasons I was inspired to do that was because of my trip to Westland and up to the bread lab, where they're really working to increase the biodiversity of our agriculture. Because of commodity farming, we are now creating these monocultures where if anything, any sort of disease, any sort of strange weather comes, like we have wiped out complete huge miles and millions, thousands of acres of plants because they all were coming from the exact same stock. We don't have the diversity they need to be able to survive and be strong. So one of the things that is actually happening is Matt Hoffman and Westland Whiskey work directly with the bread lab. They actually have hired a grad student. They pay them to go through this program to help create new strains of barley that work wonderfully in the Pacific Northwest, that have great yields, that have great flavor, and that so that they can then get off of the commodity market 100%. Everything will be coming from from the Skagit Valley, and there's also on the other side of the mountain, but I don't know what it's called. Sorry. Um,
Hmm.
so I think that the fact that they have been so mindful about the ways they move throughout this industry and the choices that they can make. So Solum, like the fact that they're using their own peat, the fact that they are working with Gariana oak, which is the Oregon oak that only grows in the Pacific Northwest, and now is down to 5% of its habitat, but they have programs where they are going out and planting. They harvest dead trees to be able to plant new trees. And so they're being very, very conscious about how they're moving through this industry. And I just think it's a wonderful thing. And I hope that we can all be inspired by that. Because the earth is our own, it's our home. And a lot of the things that we are doing right now are causing so much damage. And I just hope that we can all, as an industry, start to be a bit more mindful about our waste. So they also are very lucky that they're in Seattle. So their power is hydropower. So,
Hmm.
that's great already. They do a really wonderful job with their water, of trying to be as efficient as possible. So I don't know. I think they're doing a wonderful job. And I'm really excited to see what this is like because I've actually tasted this on the way, right? So I've tasted this alone, but before they were able to get the ppms high enough.
Mm.
Yeah, so when I was at the maltings, they were showing me what he built to actually create this infusion for the
Wow.
barley, and they just hadn't been able to get it up to a high enough ppm for it to really be detectable in a way that was unique. It was like, okay, that is, something that is peated. So they, at that time, were blending it into their peated and just like really giving it an opportunity to like figure it out. So I'm so glad they figured it out. And now we get to try it.
Yeah. So ppm, of course, phenolic parts per million. And this is a term that you see bandied about quite a bit in the Scotch world. I'm thinking about the way that Bruichladdich, for example, that goes through and enumerates it in painstaking detail in the octomore and stuff like that. But you'll see ppm a lot. I'm actually trying to get somebody on here, Felipe, to talk about basically kind of rehash one of the talks that he did at Tales. So if any listeners are going to Tales, keep your eye out. I'm pretty sure have they released the seminars yet?
I don't know. I know that they had tickets out. I don't know if the seminars were also released. They should have been.
They should. Assume. It's in July.
So mine is Why Farmers and Distillers Should Be Friends.
So if you're going to Tales, sign up, hang out with Tracie.
Please.
And so this is to get a little bit further in here. This is actually made using peat that's harvested from bogs within a couple hours of the distillery or Seattle. And so they kind of do a neat process. I don't know if you got to see it or if they talked you through it while they were there, but in Scotland, they do a lot of bog draining. And then, for obvious reasons, that makes it easier to kind of harvest this turf in an efficient way. But there are some other side effects to that. Obviously, bogs are their own little unique ecosystems, and there's certain gases that are released when you do that, and you essentially expose these layers of rotting turf suddenly to air. They're not covered by water anymore. So it seems like the folks over at Westland have found a way to go in without really disturbing the bog environment as much and actually harvest the peat wet and then go and dry it. So kind of another little tick on that sustainability kind of belt that they're building.
Absolutely.
So what do you get? I mean, what do you get if you were to nose this blind and not know the story behind it? What would you be thinking?
I would immediately think that it was a Highland peat, right? So it's definitely much more forest than phenols that put out more of the oceanic or iodine, those sorts of things. The iodine is not here for me. It's much more of a sweet peat.
Sweet peat.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking for like those roast meats and that's not it. This is a very unusual smoke for me. I'm almost an herbal smoke. I was thinking because, I don't know if I should have this conversation, but I have burnt some lavender recently. I have a new garden and it's reminding me more of like an herbal burn, which I think is strange, but
sweet peat and the herbal burn. So one of the things that I did notice in my research here is that so one of the unique components. So peat is just rotting plants and animals, right? That's kind of partially decomposed and then solidified into this kind of turf plant substrate. And one of the ingredients, quote unquote, in the peat up by Westland is actually Labrador tea, I believe.
That makes so much sense. There we go.
So you were right. You were right.
Oh, that's cool.
But I agree. You're not just right, like on paper. You're right in the glass too. Like it's not. To me, I might even if I weren't thinking single malt, I might even struggle to identify this as peated just on the nose. Now on the palate, like I think it definitely comes through a little bit more. You get more of that smoke, and but on the nose, it's rather delicate, I would say, but definitely plays kind of in that Highland kind of style.
Yes. But I would definitely say that it would have been a quite low ppm, and then it would have been with a Speyside style whiskey because all of the things are pointing towards lightness and fruit and. But on the palate.
Yeah, it is. This is a complicated dram, and it's still changing as I'm trying to say, oh, it's this or it's this, but nope. Every time I go to say a tasting note, it kind of evolves a little bit. And I to me, it's kind of warping between oily and dry, almost like the dry
Exactly.
from the smoke, but then oily from something else. And every time I'm like, ooh, it's drying out, then it gets oily again on me. So there's
Yeah.
some really interesting textural play going on here that I think, you know, speaking to price point, yes, this is a very limited release. They will do others. I think they're up to number 6 and number 3 on the other 2 releases in the series that are kind of showcasing the oak and showcasing the, I believe, the barley.
Yeah, so the Outpost Range is really what they've created to show that sense of place. So they are focusing on barleys that have been created, that are either created or that were intentional, that were oh my gosh,
sort of heritage.
Like yeah, exactly. But they are from the Pacific Northwest. Like they are things that thrive in that environment. So the Calare is one of those they used for the barley, and then the Gariana oak, which we spoke about, which is only in that area, and then using their own peat is that again. This is the third like addition, like style that they've done, but within the barley they explore different barleys. Within the Gariana they're doing different expressions, different percentages, different finishes using the Gariana. And now we get to explore what is Washington peat like, and how are they going to then take that into new realms.
Yeah, and to me, I guess in a word, it's crazy. Washington peat is crazy so far for me. I can't figure it out yet. So while I still sit here, and it's super long finish too.
Mm-hmm.
But while I still struggle to figure out exactly what just happened to my palate, I'll give a few more stats. So this release is only a little over 4,000 bottles.
Okay.
Again, they're going to do further releases of this expression, but the first one's pretty limited. The MSRP is $150 a bottle. So this is definitely, moving into the premium / aspiring to be super premium, but wants people to still buy it kind of price point. This is your special Christmas present price point. And a couple other, they were actually really granular with their process. So they fermented this for 96 to 144 hours, which is 96 hours is 4 days, I believe. And then in terms of cask types, they've got a whole portfolio of wood that they've used on this. So they've got Cooper's Reserve New American Oak, Cooper's Select New American Oak, and then also there's a certain amount of First Fill X bourbon casks that were used. Yeah. And for people who are like, Cooper's Reserve, like, what is that, like Cooper's Sharp Cheese or something? No, it's the way that some of these barrels are actually marketed to distillers is they'll have different levels of seasoning on the staves, right? So the difference between a reserve and a select, for example, I'm just giving a hypothetical here, could be the amount of time that they were seasoned, or it could be and one of a couple of different factors that these Coopers use to kind of improve the quality of the staves that they use to create these barrels. So that to me is like when they say Cooper's Reserve and Cooper Select, they've got like some really nice barrels and then probably some really nice barrels. Right. I don't know if that's the way you read that.
I do actually, because we know that you always would prefer to have longer seasoning outside is your preference, but that's also very expensive. So we know that some people will season outdoors for up to 5 years. So and the flavor profile that you get from those is dramatically different. So being able to even have a small portion of those can really create some dynamic flavor changes in your whiskey. Now, I would assume that probably both of these though are going to be coopered or seasoned outside versus doing it in the ovens, which is typically what's being used for some of the lower ends. But they're putting such great barley in, like they've done so much work that I assume that they are going to put that into some well seasoned and probably also maybe the toast. Because that long toast really does create a lot of really beautiful flavors as well. So maybe that's something in there.
Yeah, I think I have not spent a whole ton of time. I think this is my 4th or 5th year judging at ADI, and I don't spend a ton of time on tables where they're doing a lot of whiskeys. Occasionally, I'll get a bunch of aged stuff if I'm on like the rum or the cane table. Okay. And it was really illuminating for me the last time I judged, and I got to hang out with Nancy Fraley, who is just an aging guru.
Yeah.
And as we were nosing and tasting some stuff on the table, like she would be able to take, like, you know, we'd give some notes, and then she'd pick it up and she'd go, "Oh yeah, it's green. It's got a green tinge. This was kiln dried."
Right. Yes.
And I was like, oh, like, it's crazy that you know that. But on the other hand, our flavor analysis kind of bears out what you're saying.
Exactly that. So I think even more kiln drying like can be detected. Like you can taste it. You just can.
Yeah.
But typically, I mean, if you're able to blend things away, great job. Go on and do it. But yeah, kiln drying can sometimes do a little bit of damage to some whiskeys, single barrels especially. I've had some single barrels that I know were kiln drying from some new brands, and I just didn't know how to tell them.
Eesh. Ooh, better you than me. So yeah, getting back to the Solum, I guess this is really fascinating to me because I think it's an emerging case for super premium American single malt in our market, and it's just not something that you really see. What are your thoughts on just the overall project of this and what's going on in this class? Because it is fascinating, and I'm kind of jelly that this bottle is now
gone.
Empty.
I am even more excited about. Actually, I think I really do want to pick up a bottle of this because there's nothing that tastes like this. I've never had anything that tastes like this, and even the finish, though it's long, it's it's this clean smoke. Like I'm not left with this heavy, boggy, ashtray. Like it is a very light, aromatic finish, like still sitting on my palate. That's just like as if I just burned just a tiny little bit of incense and inhaled it. Just, it's not heavy. There's a little bit of a sharpness, sort of acrid smoke for a moment on your palate doing that drying. But then it comes back, like you said, with that oiliness that goes, oh wait, no. It's not going that far, but it does vacillate on your palate. There is some fruit, but I get a lot of really lovely sort of golden syrup. There is a little bit of that maltiness.
Yeah.
Oh, this is really interesting.
Yeah, it almost like the golden syrup almost. It kind of one of my favorite tasting notes, and some people just don't like this one. It's not one that I see as very popular, but I like it because I grew up eating them. But graham cracker almost like this is like a very smoky adultish kind of graham cracker.
100%.
Yeah,
100% actually. And for me, you say graham cracker, I taste it. Like I immediately know. I know exactly what the graham cracker is.
And it took me a while to get there because of all the other stuff that's going on. But yeah, if you can just meditate and kind of isolate the malt, then it's like, yeah, that is kind of nice and round and sweet. So as I said, $150 a bottle. That might be a price point at which most people walk up to on the shelf and say, are we sure this is worth it? And
understand that.
To that, I would simply respond, let's see if you can find this at a bar and get a pour and then tell us what you think, because I don't know. I mean, I'm not spending a whole lot of money on liquor these days, but to me, it's not worth it.
Right. And I mean, knowing the background of it, and I know even more of it back. I know how many years they worked on this project because they just couldn't get the actual, the peating, so the kilning process, actually being able to take this wet barley and kiln enough of this peat for it to be and captured and to get enough of that phenol to actually abduct to that. It was really, really an interesting conversation to have at Skagit Valley and to have with everybody at the distillery that was waiting for this to get to the point where they could release it on its own. So knowing the years that it took, it's one of those things right? So when we talk about the 3-chamber still, right? Knowing the years and the passion behind that project makes that bottle sitting at $200. You're like, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
Like this to me, I know that there's been years of effort to create this. So and what has been created is something that is incredibly unique, and it is delicious. It's also it's nothing where I wouldn't feel bad giving this to someone who doesn't like peated whiskey.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. So people that don't like that iodine, that don't like that heavily acrid, I would give this to them because I think that this is something that they could actually enjoy.
Well, that's a wonderful note to wrap this.